Hello, aspiring civil servants. I hope your preparation for UPSC Prelims 2023 is going smoothly. Recently, I received a frantic message from a civil services aspirant. I gave him a buzz, and in the ensuing conversation, I realized that this candidate had been overwhelmed by exam pressure. The humongous task of revising the syllabus had taken a big toll on his confidence. Guys, in a few days from now, lakhs of candidates from across the country will be battling it out in Prelims 2023 for the highly coveted services. This is the fag end of your preparation. It is quite natural that you would experience exam pressure during this stage. The humongous task of revision takes a big toll on a candidate's confidence in this phase. Self-doubt, feeling of inadequacy creeps in. A lot of candidates also entertain the thought of skipping the attempt. Well, as someone who has been guiding civil services aspirants for last several years, let me tell you, or let me assure you, that all this is quite natural. Our mind tends to play these games with us in this last stage. It is important that we maintain our sanity and remain focused on the task at hand. And for this purpose, it is crucial to have a prioritized plan of revision. By prioritized plan of revision, I mean focusing on those topics of the syllabus which have a high ROI. That helps you to remain focused on the task of revising for the exam effectively rather than allowing your mind to wander. And for this purpose, I, Jawwad Kazi, am starting a series for history revision for prelims examination from this particular episode onwards. In this series, I am going to take up those topics of history across ancient, medieval, and modern which have a high return on investment. If you have not yet subscribed to our channel, that is StudyIQ IAS English channel, then I would urge you to subscribe it right away and also follow me on Telegram to get latest updates of my videos as and when they are posted. The link to my Telegram channel can be seen on the screen over here. This is the name of the Telegram channel, Jawwad Kazi UPSC Preparation. And here's the link, Jawwad Kazi Current Affairs. By clicking on the link or by joining this channel, you can get updates about my videos and many other things that I post over here. Now, let's get started, guys, and start with the first episode of the series where I will be discussing important or key terms from medieval India for which UPSC has shown some propensity for asking questions. So let's dive in and get started. Before we actually start the discussion, guys, I want to share with you certain examples of questions from PYQs where UPSC has asked key terms. This will strengthen your belief in the idea that investing time in key terms will be valuable in the exam. Take a look at this particular question first. With reference to Indian history, who of the following were known as Kula Dara? This was a question asked in 2022 prelims. I'm not going into the details of the question because I'm planning a separate series on PYQs which is starting very shortly. Here the answer is answer option D, Sayyids. Kula was a type of a cap, a conical pointed cap that Sayyids used to wear during medieval times. Sayyids are descendants of the Prophet from his daughter Fatima, and they had a particular style of attire which marked them out, and they had a lot of respect and prestige in the society. And one part of that attire was a special type of cap, that is Kula, and the ones who wear that cap were called as Kula Dara. So this was one term-based question that was asked last year. Let's see some more examples. With reference to medieval India, which one of the following is the correct sequence in ascending order in terms of size? So here in this question, UPSC has given you administrative units and you are expected to arrange them in ascending order. This is an NCERT based question and one is expected to know the answer for this question. A. Pargana Sarkar Suba, B. Sarkar Pargana Suba, C. Suba Sarkar Pargana, and D. Pargana Suba Sarkar are the options that are given. You would surely know that Suba meant province, so it has to be the largest unit over here, and that way you can eliminate these two options. And if you have done your revision well, you would know that over several villages, a pargana existed, and many pargana together formed a sarkar during medieval times, and that's how you can reach the answer, that is answer option A. So this was another term-based question that was asked. Let's see one more question. With reference to history of India, consider the following pairs. Aurang, in charge of treasury of the state. Bania, Indian agent of East India Company. Mirasidar, designated revenue payer to the state. These three terms were given and you are expected to find out which ones are clearly, correctly matched. Here this first term was not appropriately matched. Aurang meant a warehouse and not in charge of a treasury, and therefore that statement was wrong. Rest two were right, and that makes your answer as B. Guys, here I'm not getting into the questions. Let me repeat once again, because we are going to have a separate series for PYQs. Here I'm only sharing these questions as examples of how UPSC can ask term-based questions. And you might have noticed that UPSC does ask questions based on administrative units, officials, and revenue-related terms, so on and so forth. So we are going to take up all of that for revision in this lecture. Which of the following phrases defines the nature of hundi generally referred to in the sources of post-Harsha period, early medieval times? Hundi is, options given are, advisory issued by the king to his subordinates, a diary to be maintained for daily accounts, a bill of exchange, or an order from the feudal lord to his subordinates. Now, hundi was a bill of exchange, a financial instrument that helped facilitate trade over long distances. And this is something that is mentioned in your standard sources, an easy question to get. So, economic terms are also asked by UPSC in this fashion. Let's see the next question. In the revenue administration of Delhi's Sultanate, the in charge of revenue collection was known as Amil. The Ikta system of Delhi Sultans was an ancient indigenous institution. Statement number 2. Statement number 3. The office of Mir Bakshi came into existence during the reign of Khalji Sultans of Delhi. So 3 statements are given over here. Note that again UPSC is asking questions related to revenue, related to administrative systems, related to different types of posts. Statement number 1 was right. Yes, Amil was associated with revenue collection purpose. So 1 is not a problem. 2, the Ikta system was not an ancient indigenous system. This was a system that the Turks brought with them from their land of origin, and they had themselves borrowed it up from the Abbasids. 3rd, the office of Mir Bakshi came into existence during Mughal times. There was a different office during the Delhi Sultanate period. Again, all of this is there in your NCERT. So these statements were easy to get as such. Answer is answer option A, 1 only. So I hope you're getting the point as to how UPSC can ask these sort of questions, term-based questions. One more example here. With reference to Mughal India, what is or are the difference or differences between Jagirdar and Zamindar? Jagirdar, statement 1 says, were holders of land assignments. Holders of land assignments in lieu of judicial and police duties, whereas Zamindars were holders of revenue rights without obligation to perform any duty other than revenue collection. Now, this statement is clearly wrong. Zamindars had the responsibility of maintaining law and order and some other functions also. Therefore, half part of the statement is very obviously and directly incorrect. Jagirdars also performed many other duties, and that is why the statement is wrong. Land assignment to Jagirdars were hereditary, and revenue rights of zamindars were not hereditary, is what the statement is saying. It is actually exactly the converse of this. Jagirdars were not hereditary. The continuation of their jagirs depended on the whims and fancies of the emperor, whereas in case of zamindars, they were hereditary, unless of course some extreme measures were taken against a particular zamindar for disobedience. In that case, it is a different story. But generally speaking, zamindari rights were hereditary. So statement number 2 is also wrong. So again, another administrative system based question or term based question is asked over here. Let's take one more example. Banjaras during the medieval period of Indian history were generally, and I'm sure you know the answer to this, Banjaras were traders basically who used to purchase goods from the hinterland, from distant areas, and bring them to the imperial capital and other major cities and towns. So here are previous year's questions which clearly demonstrate the importance of term-based questions that UPSC can ask. One more quick example here. With reference to economic history of medieval India, the term Araghatta refers to which of the following? Here again, the aim is not to go into the depths of the question. We are only seeing these as examples. The answer was water wheel used in irrigation of land. So this was a device that lifted water from the wells for the purpose of irrigation, and this is an economic, term-based question that was asked some years ago. So I hope guys by now you are convinced that UPSC definitely asks some questions based on terms. So it is in our interest to prioritize and revise some of these terms on which probable questions can be framed. Well, let's start with the discussion on the terms. Let us start from the early period of Delhi Sultanate. The first term that I am revising over here for you is Mamluk. Mamluk were elite slave soldiers during the Delhi Sultanate's period. In West Asia, during the period of Abbasid rule, the practice of employing elite slave soldiers had gained ground. These soldiers were called as Mamluks, and in subsequent times, these soldiers formed a clique or a club and went on to occupy high seats of power. Similarly, in case of India also, we see that many of these elite slave soldiers went on to hold offices of power and in fact even become sultans. The earliest period of Delhi Sultanate is noted for the Mamluk rulers like Altamash, rulers like Balban, so on and so forth. So that is the meaning of the term Mamluk. Next term is Chahla Gani or corps of 40 Turkish chiefs. Altamash, who is known as the the consolidator of Delhi Sultanate, had tried to build a corps of loyal, officials around him so that he could effectively consolidate this new state of Delhi Sultanate. And for this purpose, he had built a corps of these 40 Turkish chiefs, and based on that, the name is derived, the Chahla Gani. Okay, Turkish chiefs. They are also known by other names like Turkane Chahla Gani or Chalisa, again derived from the number of those chiefs, that is 40. So this is another key term. Next term is Sajda and Pabos. Sajda and Pabos. After the death of Altamash, with an interregnum, Balban took over the charge of Delhi Sultanate, and he inherited certain problems that were the creation of Altamash's rule. And one of the problem was the power of these elite Turkish chiefs. They saw Balban as first amongst the equals. They were not ready to accept his domination over them. And therefore, Balban had to consolidate his position and enhance the stature of the Sultan. For this purpose, he took many measures, one amongst which was introduction of the practice of sajda and pabos. Sajda means prostration and pabos means kissing the feet of the Sultan. Now, these practices were controversial in those times because in Islam, sajda is reserved or prostration is reserved only for God Almighty. But Balban introduced this Persian practice to emphasize on the higher or elevated status of the Delhi Sultan vis-a-vis his noblemen. So that's the term sajda and pabos. Next term is Malik Naib. Malik Naib was the vice regent or the deputy of the Sultan. It was the most powerful post after the Sultan. He was the de facto power when Sultan was not there at the capital. The word Naib basically means deputy in Persian. That is next in charge. This term continues in our administrative systems even today. The most famous Malik Naib that comes to my mind is Malik Kafur, who was the Malik Naib of Alauddin Khilji. So these were some of the terms that we must know from the early part of the Sultanate. Now let us see some administrative structures and units on which questions can be asked. The first term over here is Diwan-e-Wizarat. Diwan, the term means department. And Wizarat was the all-powerful department of the state that dealt, among other things, with revenue and expenditure. This was an import from Central Asian institutions, especially the Seljuks. Wizarat was headed by an officer who was called as Wazir. In the early phases of the Sultanate, this official was extremely powerful until some of his powers were taken away. The next department was Diwan-e-Mustakhraj, which was given the task of collection of arrears in revenue. The term Mustakhraj is derived from Kharaj, which means revenue. Alauddin Khilji had the ambition of building a grand army and doing conquest across the subcontinent. And for that purpose, money was very important. And therefore, to optimize the exchequer, he established this department especially for the task of realizing the arrears of revenue. That is Diwan-e-Mustakhraj. Next term is Diwan-e-Arz. Diwan-e-Arz was the military department during the Delhi Sultanate period. This department was headed by an officer called as Ariz-e-Mamalik. Okay. Later on, Mir Bakshi, about whom we saw a question earlier, would come in during Mughal times. But here we had Ariz-e-Mamalik, who was the chief of the military department. Some other terms related to the military that we must know here are Dag. Dag was the practice of branding of horses. Horses of good pedigree, good lineage, they were marked with brands. This enabled the state to ensure that the horses that are being brought by soldiers are of a certain quality. This practice was very essential for the efficiency of the army. Alauddin Khilji was very particular about it. Later on, Firoz Shah Tughlaq gave some relaxations or was not as particular, and consequently we will see the decline in efficiency of the Sultanate's army. Another practice that we must know regarding the army is Chehra, or later what was called as Huliya. This was the description of the soldier that was serving under the Muktis, Iqtidars. These soldiers their physical appearance was described and recorded so that again a check could be maintained on the number and actually the robustness of those troops who are being maintained. Very often, the chiefs or the muktis, they used to use proxies. They used to, during the inspection time, they used to just show the numbers inflated so that they could gain more in terms of salary for those soldiers. So these practices required a system of check which was called as chehra and later was referred to as huliya regarding soldiers. The next term is Vaj. Vaj were soldiers who were paid by land assignments during Firoz Shah Tughlaq's times. And those soldiers who were paid in terms of cash, they were called as Gair Vaj. Firoz Shah Tughlaq dispensed away with the compulsory practice of cash payments of Alauddin Khalji and started to pay by land assignments. This had a great effect later on the efficiency of the army, especially its finances. These soldiers were called as Vaj. Next, Diwan-e-Insha. Diwan-e-Insha was the department of correspondence of the state. The correspondence that the state had amongst its departments, provinces, as well as with the foreign relations that was dealt with by the Diwan-e-Insha, Department of Correspondence. Next term is Mir Saman. Mir Saman was the head of the royal supplies. The ruling elites of Delhi Sultanate lived a life of pomp, opulence and luxury. And this life of pomp, opulence and luxury had to be supported by constant supply of items of luxury. That responsibility was of Mir Sama for the royal family, the royal household. Let's see some more terms, guys. Okay. Amir meant commander, commander of troops, and Amirul Umra meant commander of commanders. This word over here, Amir-ul Umra, it's a conjunction same as of that we use in English. So commander of commanders, Amir-ul Umra. Wakil-e-Dar. Dar is an Arabic word which means house. Wakil-e-Dar was another name for the officer who was in charge of the royal household during the medieval times. And also he took care of salaries of the Sultan's personal staff. Wakil-e-Dar. The most important and trustworthy nobles of the rulers were appointed to the office of Wakil-e-Dar. The next office was Amir Hajib, who was the master of ceremonies of the royal court. His role was to ensure decency and decorum, a stately kind of arrangement at the royal ceremonies. Mustarif was the accountant and Mustafi was the auditor during the the Delhi Sultanate periods. Barid-e-Mamalik was in charge of the state's news agency. The ruler had to keep a tab on distant areas, on the nobles, what was happening in the state. And for this purpose, a special department was created, which was headed by Barid-e-Mamalik. And this Barid-e-Mamalik got news from several Barids at local levels. These Barids, they wrote down news and passed it on to the head of the department, that is Barid-e-Mamalik. Kotwal was the official in charge of city administration during Mughal times. Cities had their own system of administration and Kotwal was in charge of that particular system. All major cities during Mughal times, they used to have this official called as the Kotwal. The next term here is Adl. Adl meant justice. From this word Adl, which is an Arabic word basically, the word Adalat has been derived in Urdu Hindi. Adl means justice. The medieval state gave a lot of emphasis on justice. This was an important virtue for a state that claimed to be an Islamic state, to dispense justice. So that's an important virtue. Okay. Now let us see certain terms related to revenue administration. The first term over here is khalisa. Khalisa. Khalisa comes from the root word khalis. Khalis means exclusive or pure. So Khalisa lands in revenue administration were crown lands. These were the best lands in the dominion. They were reserved for the crown, which basically means that revenue from the Khalisa lands went exclusively to the exchequer without any intermediaries in the between. Without any intermediaries in between. Okay, so this was exclusive source of revenue for the royal exchequer. Next term is ushri. Ushri meant cultivable land. Land that was cultivable, and the tax that was levied on such land was called as ushur. Ikta is another important term on which UPSC has already asked a question. Ikta was a system of land revenue assignment. The Delhi Sultanate wanted to extract the maximum revenue possible from its dominion, and for this purpose, it created a system of iktas. Under this system, competent officials were given these land revenue assignments from where they were supposed to extract revenue, take their salary, maintain certain soldiers, and send back or remit the excess or surplus to the royal exchequer. So this was a system that enabled the Delhi Sultanate to economically function effectively. The owner of Ikta was called as Iqtidar. The person who held Ikta was called as Iqtidar. The word Dar, D-A-R, is often used as a suffix in many medieval terms. It basically means what we use these days colloquially in Hindi as wala. Like somebody from Delhi is referred to as Delhi wala. So the equivalent of that in Persian is dar when associated with something. Don't confuse with the dar of Arabic. There it means a house, whereas when it comes as a suffix in Persian terms, it means the possessor of. So an iqtidar meant the possessor of an ikta, that is a land revenue assignment. Iqtidar was also called as mukti, person who holds an ikta, as well as wali. So these are other terms used for this particular office. Let's see the next term, fawazil. What was fawazil? Fawazil was the surplus income of the iqtidar after he met his expenses as well as expenses of his soldiers. So iqtidar is extracting the revenue, meeting his expenses, expenses of the soldiers that he is supposed to maintain, and the remaining amount was called as fawazil, which was supposed to be sent to the central exchequer. Okay. Next term is zabt. Zabt is a revenue system based on measurement of land. Every state wants to maximize its revenue potential. And during the medieval times, land revenue obviously was the chief source of income. And for this purpose, the medieval state wanted to optimize it through measuring the land, and such a land revenue system was called as Zabti system. The process of measurement of land for this purpose, that is Zabti system, was called as Masahat. Masahat. Okay? Chaliye. Next term, Wafa-e-Biswa. Okay. Now, when you measure the land, you naturally must also have some kind of idea regarding its yield so that you can extrapolate to come to a revenue demand. You have to tell the peasant that based on the measurement, you have so much land, and using certain parameters, you expect certain revenue to be paid by him. So how do we derive those numbers? For that, a standard called as Wafa-e-Biswa was used. Wafa-e-Biswa means yield per unit. What will be the yield per unit of the land? So that based on the yield and the land measured, multiply that, you come to the total production, and then a third or 50% of that would be the state's share. Biswa, by the way, guys, is 1/20th of a biga. Biga is a unit for measurement of land, used in medieval times, and even to this day, sometimes it is used. 1 acre is equal to approximately 1.6 bighas. Okay. And 1/20th of a biga makes a biswa. Kharaj, as we saw earlier itself, means land revenue. Okay. Diwan-e-Mustakhraj, we have seen this term earlier, was a department for realization of arrears in revenue. Next, Diwan-e-Amir-e-Kohi. Okay. This was a special department that was set up in Delhi Sultanate during the Tughlaq times for improving cultivation. This department extended cultivation, gave loans to farmers, and encouraged them to take more remunerative crops. So this department was basically aiming at improving the outcome of agriculture for the Sultanate. That is Diwan-e-Amir-e-Kohi, an innovation during the Tughlaq times. Okay. Now let us see certain officials and terms associated with revenue and agriculture. Khoot, Mukaddam and Chaudhary. Who are these Khoots, Mukaddams and Chaudharys? These were basically hereditary village officials who had tremendous social respect and status in the society. They were part of the rural aristocracy. So they are those who have firm roots in the rural hinterland, and they discharge certain revenue functions for the state. Like, for example, collecting revenue from the farmers and handing it over to the state officials. Remember, they are not directly employees of the state. They are locals who have this hereditary responsibility as well as status. Because of this role that they discharged, they claimed certain privileges such as Haq-e-Khoti and Kismat-e-Khoti. Haq-e-Khoti was a privilege that they had from the state. Okay. So a Khot, suppose he has 10 bighas of land, he will not pay revenue to the state on the full 10 bighas. Certain part of his land will be exempt from payment of revenue, and that special privilege was called as Haq-e-Khoti. Why does he have that privilege? Because he is discharging that role or function for the state. Second type of privilege was Kismat-e-Khoti, which was a privilege vis-a-vis the peasants of that area. The peasants of that area had to pay a certain cess to these Khoots, Mukaddams, etc., and that was called as Kismat-e-Khoti. Alauddin Khalji had clamped down on these traditional rural elites. He had made them pay he paid tax on all their lands and also abolished many of the traditional privileges which they had. Next term is Kanungo. Kanungos were revenue record keeping officials in rural areas. Nankar meant Zamindar's revenue share. This is a term used in context of Zamindars. Another term is Haq-e-Sharb. Haq-e-Sharb was basically a water tax on peasants who had benefited from irrigation that was carried out because of state dug canals. So state has incurred the expense, the effort of digging canals, because of which the farmers' production has increased. So they have to pay a tax for that. That tax was called as Haq-e-Sharb. Okay. Haq means right, as you know, and Sharb is an Arabic root word which means drink. From this we have derived so many words like Sharbat. That is again coming from the same root word called as Sharb. The next terms here are Sondhar and Takkavi. Sondhar and Takkavi. Sondhar and Takkavi were loans for agriculture. Loans given for improvement of agriculture. Muhammad bin Tughlaq famously issued these loans, Sondhar loans, so that the agricultural output of the state could be increased. Okay guys, now let us see some more departments over here. Diwan-e-Risalat. These terms are associated with the ecclesiastical department of the state. Diwan-e-Risalat was the department that dealt with religion-related affairs or matters of the state. Now, during the medieval state Delhi Sultanate or later during Mughal times also, the religious elite had an important role to play. They provided legitimacy to the rulers, and therefore in return, they had an important say or functionality in the state. For that purpose, a separate department called as Diwan-e-Risalat existed, which was headed by Sadar-us-Sudur. He was the chief of this department, Diwan-e-Risalat, ecclesiastical department. The Sadar-us-Sudur ensured that Shariat was not trampled upon by the state. No laws contravening to the Shariat were passed. While this was the norm, there were always, exceptions and challenges. Shariat basically means the Islamic law. Now, you may have come across the same term spelled as Sharia also. So, what is Shariat and what is Sharia? Both are essentially the same. The way you pronounce it differs. If the sentence continues in Arabic, then it is pronounced as Shariat. If there's a word subsequent to it, it becomes Shariat. If there is a stop at the end, then the T sound is dropped and it becomes Sharia, both words being the same. Zawabit. Zawabit were secular laws that supplemented the Shariat. Shariat alone could not frame laws for the complexities that the state faced. There were many areas that were beyond the scope of the Shariat. So for this purpose, there was a need for secular laws, and such laws were called as Zawabit. Next term over here is Abwab. Abwab were cesses that were not sanctioned in the Islamic law. Cesses that are not there or not part of the Islamic law. Islamic law has given a series of cesses, taxes that can be levied, but the state required money, and for that purpose, newer cesses were brought in, and they were called as abwabs. Ghari and charai. These are again two types of abwabs. Ghari is house tax and charai is grazing tax. Okay? If you possessed a house, just like we pay property tax if you have a house or some other property, similarly medieval times you had a house tax called as ghari and charai for using pasture lands. Next term is muhtasibs. Muhtasibs, for want of a better term, were like the moral police of the day. Their responsibility was to ensure that there was no violation or open flouting of the Sharia. These muhtasibs used to ensure, like for example, there is no open, drinking of intoxicants. There is no open prostitution as such. Okay? They also assisted the judiciary in discharge of judicial functions. So that was the role of muhtasibs. Then the next term is malfuzat. Malfuzats were the compilation of sayings of Sufi saints. Malfuzat, the word is derived from the word loves. Loves, as you know, means word. So compilation of the sayings or words of Sufi saints were called as malfuzat. Chali, let's take a few more terms. Next term is inam. Inam was a grant that the state gave to an individual for rendering meritorious service for the state. If an individual had discharged some specific responsibility in a distinguished manner, then the state gave him a reward in the form of inam. Okay. Next was idrar. Idrar was grant given to the poor people. The next term is waqf, which you often come across in the news as well. Waqf in the Muslim law is a grant made for religious institutions. It is a dedication of a property for religious purposes. Milk or amlak. Amlak is the plural of milk. It's a land grant for religious or social purposes. Milk or amlak. Madad-e-maash. Madad-e-maash meant tax-free land grants that were given to the religious elites of those times. These religious elites played the very important role of providing legitimacy to the rulers and ensuring loyalty of the subjects to the rulers. And in return, they had some of these privileges such as Madad-e-maash. Okay. Now let us see certain important terms related to the economy. The first term is Shahana. The word Shahana is derived from the Perso-Arabic term Shah, which means ruler. So Shahana was a royal official. An example of this post was the Shahana-e-Mandi, who was the royal official for market during Alauddin Khalji's times. Alauddin Khalji's period is remarkable for his market experiments. The success of these market experiments hinged on effective implementation of his ordinances. To ensure that these ordinances were upheld, an official was appointed who was Shahana-e-Mandi. And we all know how remarkable Alauddin Khalji's market reforms or his experiments were for that day and age. Next, Munhiyas. Munhiyas were market spies of Alauddin Khalji. Again, they were part of that same machinery to ensure effective implementation of his market reforms. Next term are Banjaras, which we have already seen in the form of question asked earlier in 2016. They were traders, mostly grain traders. Then came the Gomasthas. Gomasthas were agents. They worked on commission. They tried to facilitate a deal between a buyer and a seller. Next term is Ganj. If you go to some of our old cities, you'll come across areas which have this name, Ganj. So Ganj were those areas where there were markets. Okay. The literal meaning of the term Ganj, there's one more meaning, is treasure. Okay. It is also used for treasure, but here primarily when we see our syllabus, the term Ganj is used in context of markets. Hundi, as we saw, already question has been asked, was a bill of exchange that was used during medieval times. Sarrafs were money changers during medieval times. They facilitated trade and commerce with their function of exchanging monies. They facilitated international trade and they were also working as, sellers of gold related items. Hun, Tanka, Fanam, Dam, Jital, etc. All of these are types of coins. UPSC has already asked a question on this, Fanam. Okay. These are other types of coins and also there were mohars, dinars that were used. These were gold coins, mohars and dinars. Okay. So these are all names for different types of coins. Chali, next term, Karkhana. Karkhanas were royal workshops during medieval period. Now, medieval times, as you all know and understand, the idea of capitalism had not yet evolved. So, we see that the state had to play an important role in producing items of luxury. And for this purpose, royal karkhanas were set up by the state. Firoz Shah Tughlaq is particularly famous for having many such karkhanas, and he is supposed to have employed several thousand slaves in these royal karkhanas, which came out with items of the finest quality and luxury. Next, Diwan-e-Bandagon. The word banda in Perso-Arabic refers to a slave, and Diwan-e-Bandagon basically meant the department of slave. Using of slaves, buying and selling of slaves was very common during medieval times. There were organized markets of slaves as well, and the state was the biggest, employer of these slaves, or rather the owner of slaves. And for that purpose, there was a special department. Now let us see certain miscellaneous terms. Dhunia was the cotton carder's bow that was used to separate the seeds from the cotton. Rahat and Sakia, these were basically devices for lifting up water. These were based on the Persian wheel and often used animal power for it. Okay. This facilitated more efficient irrigation of lands. So that is Rahat and Sakia. The word Sakia is derived from the root word S-A-Q, sak, which basically means to provide a drink. Okay, so Sakia is again associated with that. Ustur Lab was an astrological chart that was prepared during medieval times. Sabak-e-Hind. Sabak-e-Hind was a new style of Persian literature influenced by India that was started by Amir Khusro. Amir Khusro, the versatile scholar, Indianized the Persian language by bringing in Indian idioms and symbols and metaphors, and that particular style is referred to as Sabak-e-Hind. He is also credited with introducing Sanam, Ghora and Ayman, which are Perso-Arabic ragas that Amir Khusro introduced. So here we have discussed, guys, some of the key terms. It's not an exhaustive list certainly, but some of those key terms on which there is probability that UPSC may ask questions. If you have watched the video thus far, I'm sure you would have derived a lot of benefit out of it. Do consider liking this particular video and sharing it with your friends in the Civil Services Aspirants fraternity. Do subscribe to the channel to get more such videos, and also follow me on Telegram to get my video updates and other important things that I would be sharing. That is Jawwad Kazi signing out. Thank you very much. Good day to all of you.